Hey guys, this is the Auto Enthusiast, and today we're going to take a look at the difference between a short ram intake and a cold air intake. We're going to talk a little bit about what the properties of each are, what the key differences are, and which are better. So up here we have a cold air intake, and over here we have a short ram intake. As you can see right off the bat, the cold air intake is much longer and larger than the short ram intake, which is short. So, key differences between the two. The ideology behind a cold air intake is that you're taking the air from outside the engine bay. So usually they're longer so that wherever your air inlet is, you have long piping that brings the actual cone filter or whatever type of filter you're using, that intake filter, and it brings it outside the engine bay. Most of the time the cold air intake is driven under and in front of the engine bay. So it's in the front right quarter of your car. A lot of what makes a cold air intake and why it's beneficial is it pulls cold air outside the engine bay because the air inside the engine bay is very, very hot. So it pulls in cold air, and it usually has very smooth piping, as you can see above. There's not a lot of turns, and it's usually direct airflow. But pulling this cold air in increases horsepower, it increases power, it's more combustible. A big part about drawing in this colder air is that there's more oxygen, because it's not reused air from the actual engine. There's more oxygen, and it's colder, and therefore when it actually inlets to the engine, it creates more power. There's a higher level of combustion. So to kind of finalize what the cold air intake is it's just a longer intake that relocates the normal air box or air cone air filter to a space or location that's usually an area that has a lot of ambient air passing through it or passing over it, and it is away from heat being exhausted out of the engine into its near environment. Okay, so what a short ram intake is it's short, like in the name. It's very direct, it has very minimal piping, it's usually a straight pipe, and the ideology behind a short ram intake is that you're just getting more air. With less piping, there's less air resistance within the piping. And what's important here is that if you look at the cold air intake, there's quite a bit of piping. So there's a lot of air resistance and friction on that air as it travels through the engine. With the short ram, it's just driving in, and there's more air. So the idea behind the short ram is that you're going to get more air and more oxygen, and there's going to be less resistance. And you're already probably pulling it from a similar area to your stock air filter or where the air comes in. And so you're not compromising the temperature. Maybe you're not making it better, but you're just driving more air to the engine. So a quick note, I have a Genesis Coupe. Soon I will be posting a review of the air intake that I have, and I have a short ram. So what I have is very common amongst short ram intakes. I have a heat shield, which usually when you have a stock air filter, it's in an air box, which acts almost as a heat shield. That air box has ambient air driven into it, and you can see that picture above. In that picture, we can see the grille of a car, and right above the emblem, you'll see that there is like these spaces, and ambient air when you're driving is actually getting forced into those spaces, and it's driven to your air box. So what my short ram intake on my Genesis Coupe, and what a lot of short ram intakes do, is they almost recreate that air box, however with a heat shield that seals when the hood closes, and it seals on the bottom. But it's made out of a more thermal resistant material. So mine's made out of some type of steel compound, or I'm not exactly sure what mine's made out of, but I know that it's more thermally resistant and therefore acts as this, it has the same attributes as the stock airbox, except less heat from the engine actually gets in there. So it improves the temperature slightly. However, my short ram intake has a larger diameter in the piping than the cold air and my stock, and pulls air through a shorter distance, like most short ram intakes. So for me, I'm worried about hydrolocking. I drive a car that's low. I don't want to put my cold air intake on the ground. So there's a lot of, cons to the cold air intake. Where the short ram, I know that I'm getting more air. So what's the difference, and which do you want, and which makes more power? In a real world, it's different for every car. Some cars are going to do better and perform more when they have more of that cold air and more oxygen driven in by the cold air intake. And the same goes for the short ram. Both have different risks. The short ram, I would say, is the safer, because with the cold air, you risk hydrolocking. You've got more piping, and the piping's usually not all in one. You're usually having to put seals and connect the piping. You have a lot of places for air. Another big part is the short ram is very easy to install. At least for me, it would have kept me from putting my desired aftermarket intercooler in. So that was one thing that I knew that I was going to do, and I wanted to think about that. So another big warning, cold air intakes, if you are driving them to the bottom of your car, hydrolocking is a thing. I would do some research. I can talk about it soon. It's very dangerous for your car. As for what you should get, I know I'm dancing around a final answer. For most cars, when you do power testing, the cold air makes 2 or 3 horsepower more than the short ram. But in the long run, I would say the short ram is safer. Both are going to make an increase in horsepower. And if you're, sure, you might get 2 or 3 horsepower. That's not something you're going to feel behind the wheel. Yes, if you're showing your buddy a number, you're going to make 3 more horsepower than him. But you're going to have more reliability in the short ram. So I would suggest get the short ram. But do your research, look up the specific numbers for the companies that are making these aftermarket parts. They usually publish them in the comments and wherever you go to buy them. And obviously utilize YouTube. It's a great place to find out what specific people think about those specific things. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, subscribe. That'd be great. It helps the channel out. Like the video. And comment below. I'd like to hear what you have to hear, what your experiences have, and if you have any suggestions for further videos. Have a nice day.